Welcome to the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare, the podcast for busy healthcare leaders who are ready to get out of survival mode so they can focus on what matters most. This is where the burnout stops and the real talk starts. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Carter, and each week I sit down with healthcare innovators who get it. We will unpack the chaos, laugh through the hard stuff, and get you at least 2 practical tips you can use at work right away. If you're ready to clear the chaos and lead with impact, you've come to the right place. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare, the podcast for busy healthcare leaders who are done with overwhelming workloads and burnout. This podcast is built around the big idea that you are not meant to prove your worth through exhaustion. We help you get out of survival mode by discussing your real-world pain points and giving you at least 2 practical tips you can put in place right away. Today's guest is a fellow nurse and a passionate advocate for our precious nurse managers here in the U.S. Ilene Sipp is the founder of Ilene Sipp Coaching, and she's also a Be Well professional coach at Corewell Health. She's been posting really strong content on LinkedIn, and I find myself applauding it and yelling amen every time I read it, because it's like she's talking directly to my experience when I was a nurse manager. In fact, I would like to read you this summary statement from her profile because it really gets to the heart of why she supports and coaches these nurse managers. So here's what it says. She says, burnout is not a personal failure. It's proof you've been propping up a broken system that applauds your sacrifice and punishes your honesty. They taught you to stay late, say yes, skip lunch, and call it leadership. And you've done it, kept everyone afloat while quietly sinking yourself. You are smart, you're capable, you're done. Done with the empty meetings, done with the pressure to hold it together while falling apart, done with being the only one who cares. You are not crazy for wanting more. More peace, more presence, more purpose. You don't need another pep talk. You need a plan to get out from under these shoulds and lead like a human again. If you've been thinking, I can't keep doing it like this, good. That's the sign. Now's the time to build leadership on your terms. Stop pretending you're fine. Let's get to work. If that is not a Chaos Whisper manifesto, Ilene, I don't know what is. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And listening to you read that, I'm just like all fired up. Like, which mountain can I stand on top and shout from to get the attention of people just stuck? So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, it's beautiful. And I know for a fact anyone who's been a nurse manager or is currently a nurse manager is probably weeping with just validated tears. Like, yes, that is perfect. That's exactly what I feel like. So my first question I do like to ask my guests has to do with their experience with chaos at work. And I know we met and we talked quite a bit. You've spent most of your clinical career in the emergency room. So I know you have more stories than you know what to do with, but let's try to pick one. What has been your most chaotic moment in healthcare?
It's funny. You ask that and one always shows up. And what it is anyone who's ever worked the emergency room, short-staffed, knows that if you are part of a level 1 trauma center, that is when the level 1 traumas find you, is when you are like trying to do the job of multiple people and there's only so many. So one day, the ER was essentially on fire and we got a call over the radio that there was an injury to a 5-year-old girl, traumatic injury, and she came through the door. So really when the peds come in, it's like all hands on deck. Yeah. So, anyone who can step away from their team will go into the trauma room and help. So unfortunately, this trauma did not end the way that we wanted and the patient passed away. Now, to make matters worse, at the time, I had a 5-year-old daughter. And so any parent knows that it hits different. And so in the moment, you have to pull it together and you have to not pretend you can hear the mom screaming down the hall. Yeah. And you have to pretend that all is right with the world and you go back out and take care of the rest of your patients. And one of the things that always was so shocking to me is there was no buffer. There was no place to talk about it. There's no place to sort of just, what the heck just happened here? Right. And sort of be with your people and sort of just move through it. You have to compartmentalize, put on the mask and go back out. And so I took a few deep breaths, went back out to my team. And the first patient room that I walked into was of a gentleman who was there for common cough. And the wife had been waiting for the X-ray result. Nobody had been in the room for some time because we were all in the trauma room. And she just lights into me. Where have you been? Nobody's been to see my family, blah, blah, blah. Like really just took me to task. And I lost it on her. I'm so embarrassed to tell you that, but I lost it on her. And I said, be grateful that he's breathing. Be grateful that there's nothing critical in this moment, and be grateful that you're just waiting for an x-ray. And I like started crying and I walked out of the room, and I just had to go into the bathroom and sort of compose myself. And ultimately I apologized, but I was just like, the audacity. I mean, you see everybody running into this trauma room, running, and then coming back out. And the first thing you want to do is attack your nurses. And I know this is a common occurrence, especially in the emergency room. So that is one of the things that I wish I would have had the skills to recognize she's worried about her loved one. She doesn't understand how the ER works. Granted, myself, I wouldn't have attacked somebody walking out of the room. But at the same time, I could have allowed a little bit of space for her to not understand what was happening and maybe met her in a different way. So just like emotions run high. And that was probably one of the things that stand out the most, because usually I didn't lose my cool. And that day that I did. And so I learned from that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm so sorry you experienced that. It happens far too often, for sure. And as you were telling me this, I thought grace all around, because for you just experienced a trauma, as did everyone else, and most especially that patient's mom. And, not all hospitals have the resources like the CISM debrief people. Like we recently put that in place in two of my organizations, or when something like that happens, there is a timeout and the chaplain or whoever's trained comes together as a group and they have a debrief. In an ER, that's tricky, because people don't stop coming. You don't get to choose when people come to the ER.
Mm-hmm.
It also reminds me of the perspective, how much does that patient and his wife who was so angry, how much do they really understand about what's going on? But for you to expect to just come in and be sunshine and rainbows, also not super realistic. So I appreciate your transparency and your vulnerability. And I'm so sorry you experienced that.
Thank you.
It also makes me think about that show, The Pit. I don't like healthcare shows. However, I, like many other healthcare professionals, feel like that is the most realistic portrayal of what it's like in the healthcare setting. And the fact that each episode is only 1 hour. It's 1 hour of their 12-hour shift. And so much happens. And to your point, the compartmentalizing, it's a survival tactic. I mean, we're forced to do that. So I think about that from a leadership perspective too, Ilene. And I wonder too, if it's not the same at all by any means, but the skill of compartmentalizing, moving from one conversation or one situation to the next. I feel like a lot of our healthcare leaders understand how to do that. Many of them were clinical first before they were a leader, but also I can think of situations where I've been in my office as an exec or a director. A physician comes in and yells at me about something they're upset about. They close the door. And then I've got, one of my direct reports who's having their own PTSD moment, meltdown. They need some support. And you don't get an in-between to kind of collect yourself, or you leave a meeting. You know what I mean? So I think there's so much humanity, and there's a common thread there that I think so many people can empathize with that story. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's take some time to dive into the specific experience and challenges of being a nurse manager in the U.S. healthcare system today. So what are you hearing from your clients as their top concerns when they come to you for help?
I'm so glad that you asked this question, because there are 3 things that stand out the most for me. The first one is zero work-life balance. The second one is, how do I navigate conflict when I have imposter syndrome? And then the third thing is struggling to say no without feeling like the world's biggest failure. And so those are the top 3 that tend to show up for me.
Tell me more about that. I mean, what is that? So if I'm the nurse manager and I'm coming to you for this coaching and this support, what are some examples of some of that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I just want to point out that when people go from the clinical role to the managerial role, for some reason, if you're seen as a strong critical nurse or a strong bedside nurse, they automatically assume you're going to knock it out of the park as a leader. And unfortunately, the nurse gets left behind because she doesn't have the skills, or she's never taught how to sort of transition into that role. So then right off the bat, you feel like, gosh, I'm failing at this. Meanwhile, your team that you've been friends with, going to the bar with after shifts, suddenly wants nothing to do with you. And you're just like, what did I say yes to? The second thing is with setting boundaries. So many people, I hated it because it sounds like such a catchphrase, but I look at it as creating fences versus walls, because especially with nursing, it's nuanced. Like we have this season where we have to get all of these evaluations done by a certain date. So chances are we're at our desk a little bit longer. And then we have seasons where things are kind of running well and we can skip out a little bit earlier. For instance, I had a client, she was 8 months pregnant. She was new to the role and she noticed that her boss was staying late all the time. Now, her boss was in her 50s, had already raised her children, and had a high, like was the director. So she had more going on. But this gal felt like she had to stay, that it was just expected of her.
Right.
But when she had the courage to have the conversation with her, the director was like, yeah, I've been really surprised you've been staying, like you should be going home. And she thought, oh my goodness, this whole time I was under this impression that I was a failure if I didn't mirror exactly what she was doing.
What I want for the listener is also to hear that they're not alone. They're not lazy. They're not crazy. Like these experiences of your clients are reflective of at the national level what a lot of our nurse managers are experiencing. And so I think about when you mentioned making that pivot from being clinician to nurse manager, one of the questions I had was, what are so many of these organizations missing that would help nurse managers transition to these roles in a more balanced way based on what you're hearing from your clients?
Yes, that is a great question. And something that I have heard from different organizations and different nurses in different organizations is that they're missing what we call like the human transition component.
Okay.
So we're really good at teaching policies and metrics and staffing models, budgets, all those things. But what we don't teach is the identity shifts, how to emotionally regulate ourselves in different situations, how to ask for what we need and how to say no to what we don't, and ways to like kind of disconnect from the hospital once we leave. We don't learn those strategies from the facility.
Okay.
Oftentimes they just want you to pick up and run with the ball and, see what happens and go from there.
I love that you bring that up because it's funny we're talking about this because my call right before this was with a potential podcast guest who doesn't have healthcare's background, but has these incredible tips. And when I shared with him that most of these nurse leaders, not all, there are some organizations that do well, but most get zero onboarding, zero orientation, he was floored. He goes, you mean to tell me they get no training? I said, no. He goes, well, how do they know what's expected? I said, they don't usually have the conversation out loud. Like the example you gave of the pregnant manager. We don't talk about these expectations out loud. What we're doing is we're picking up cues, right, from our peers, the other managers, our leader. What time are they sending these emails? When are they responding? When are they leaving? And we're filling in the blanks with those other folks' behaviors. And I think it's a powerful point to make if you're a nurse manager and you're listening to this and you feel like you are working these long hours, you're not getting that balance. The first thing I want you to hear from Ilene is sit down and have a transparent conversation around expectations. If your director, your exec has not had that conversation with you yet, it's so important to say it because most likely, because you are a high performing clinician, you have filled in the gap with the most extreme solution possible, and you don't necessarily have to do that. So I think that's such a great point. I wanted to make sure we didn't lose that, especially for our newer nurse managers who just don't have the confidence to have that conversation just yet.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think something else to keep in mind is your upline wants you to be successful.
Right.
I think so often we think that they're just judging us from the corner, and perhaps some of that is true.
Sure.
But they ultimately want you to be successful because it's a reflection on them.
Absolutely.
So by you kind of sort of clearing the air and having the conversation, then you both get to make sure you're on the same page.
Right.
And it's so much easier to be successful when the right hand knows what the left hand is doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if your leader isn't scheduling these one-to-one conversations already, it's okay to be the one to initiate that and say, I need these conversations, especially in the beginning. I've had, as a director and exec, I've had some nurse managers who never wanted to see me. They're like, I've got it. And so we met regularly anyway, just so I knew what was happening. And then I've got some that were newer that wanted to check in every Friday afternoon before we left, make sure they're doing everything. I think you need to individualize your approach to support these folks to wherever they're at and whatever it is they need. If you're a manager and you're not getting that support, it's okay to initiate that conversation too. Absolutely.
And one last thing I'll just throw in is that you gain so much by asking somebody, how would you like to connect? How would you like feedback? How would you like criticism? Like what works best for you? There's parts of generations, like for instance, like millennials, Gen Z, that sort of thing. They seem to be okay with emails and text messages. Where if you're Gen X, we want face to face. We want to have a conversation. And so, tuning in to which way to connect with your downline and your upline is just amazing and will help to sort of clear the way and have the most robust conversations that you walk away feeling like something was solved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I know we've talked about some of the pain points. I just want to summarize for the listener. So when it came to work-life balance, your top strategy was to have that conversation, declare the norms out loud, and then hold them to it. And I love that. I also tell a lot of the nurse managers to clarify for your team what is a phone call, email, text, and then hold them to it, because the team you've inherited may be used to your predecessor's approach. And so they're going to slip back into those old habits. Mm-hmm. So what I would do with my charge nurses, when I said, I trust you to be the CEO of the unit, they were calling me at 2 a.m. for lost dentures. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it to make sure there wasn't a crisis, but I did not pick up the phone for that. I absolutely pick up the phone for there's workplace violence, whatever the extreme situation is. But they need to see you reinforcing those expectations through your behavior to create that work-life balance. So I love that. And then remind us what the other two top issues were, Ilene.
Sure. So the second thing is that once you create your boundaries, then you sort of ask for what you need, like you said. And the second thing was like navigating conflict and imposter syndrome. That was the second thing that I mentioned that they always talk about. So the strategy for that one is to really recognize that everyone struggles with conflict, number one. Number two, really set your intention for the meeting that you're going to have with maybe a difficult employee or somebody who's done something that negatively affected the unit, and you have to have the conversation and they're going to leave disappointed. If you find yourself in a situation like I did that day where the patient's family member just kind of attacked me, that's where I want to remind you, recognize what's happening in your body in that very second. Like, I'm sure I was super tense and I was ready to just like scream at this person. But if I would have taken a deep breath in that moment and recognized emotions are running high and just say, can you repeat what you said? That usually takes the edge off of what they're saying to you, because they have to repeat it and it sounds really bad. So they kind of tend to take it down a notch. And then you can say something like, okay, I'd really like to solve this with you. What are you looking for from me? And then just kind of like putting the ball in their court, taking the onus off of you so that they have to ask for what they need. They can recognize that screaming at you is not going to secure any sort of outcome that's going to benefit anyone.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like to sort of mention to people in those really tense moments. But like for having those difficult conversations that are coming, I think it's really important 5 minutes before the meeting. What is my intention of this? How can I ground myself? And I always recommend putting your feet flat on the floor, your hands in your lap, closing your eyes, and just recognizing a place in your memory, somewhere where you felt at peace, where you felt calm, and just recognizing you're here to help lead. And so when the person comes in and maybe they're all fired up or they're frustrated, you just start asking lots of questions for curiosity, like, do you know why I called this meeting? What about the situation can you share from your point of view? Would you have changed anything differently in how you responded or behaved? What is our path forward? Really just having them sort of explain to you what the best approach is forward. And then you can chime in and say what you would add to the conversation. And then at the end, making sure you have a date to check in so that person feels heard and seen, and that they feel valued enough that you care enough to make sure everything is still going okay.
Yeah, I love that. It's so much of that is also taught in Crucial Conversations. So one of the most powerful books I've read ever when I was a newer manager, and I highly recommend it to every healthcare leader, is read that book, Crucial Conversations, make it your Bible. One of the most powerful strategies. So I would, I knew I was going to have an accountability conversation with someone, my fight or flight kicks in right before the meeting. So I'd ground myself. But then it also taught us, it's this concept of declare your intention, start with heart. And so I think that's so powerful because the employee is also coming in with their own, like you said, their story and what they saw happen. And it's so powerful to start the meeting off with, my intention for this conversation is X. My intention is not why. So in this situation, it's, hey, Eileen, we're, having this conversation. My intent with this conversation is to support you, to help you reflect and to give you the tools you need to succeed should this situation arise again. My intention is not to cause shame or to make you feel bad, or make you feel small. So by saying it out loud, you're already setting the table too. So you've grounded yourself, like you mentioned, with the nervous system, but you're also making sure there are no unclear expectations about what the purpose of the meeting is too. So I love that you mentioned that.
Thank you. And something that I've noticed in the conversations with the nurse managers, nurse leaders, is that we are in a really exciting time in nursing. I say that because with leadership, for so long, it's been my way or the highway. And now we're coming up with an approach of emotional stability, emotional intelligence. And, I'm noticing that it plays such a huge role in the culture. So many nurses are trying to stronghold retention, but if they just kind of tap into the team that they have, let the team feel valued, heard. I think stay interviews are a blessing. I think that it's so nice to just be asked, like, what could we improve? What do you need? Like that makes somebody feel not invisible. And it's really easy to feel invisible when, it's busy season, always short, that sort of thing. So I see this transition happening and I'm so excited about it.
I love that you brought that up. Absolutely. I think so too. I think the new generation is going to really push us to make those changes too. So we talked about work-life balance. We talked about, that imposter syndrome, having those accountability conversations. And the third top issue was
struggling to say no without feeling like a huge failure.
Yeah, so true. So true.
So I think with this, we have to recognize as nurses, at least when I went to nursing school in 2002, the premise was you just give until you can't give anymore. Okay. And if you fall while giving, well, that's just what it is.
Or if you fall while giving, now that's enough. It almost I was trained to think that until you haven't given enough, until you are so burned out, you have nothing left to give. Nobody says it out loud.
Yeah.
But that's what we're picking up on, right?
Right. And that's one of those elephants in the room, right? And I think sometimes as leaders, we forget that we are setting the tone for everybody else. So if we can set an example of, no, I can't take this on right now, but I can show you somebody who can, or I can redirect you. If we remember that that's not a failure on us, it's actually helping out our department, because who are we if we are just gassed out and, pasting things together at the lowest level? We care about our patients and our staff. So how can we find people who can do the things that we're asking that aren't part of our role, right? Where can we delegate and empower another nurse and make them feel valued for their special sauce that they bring to the table? And recognizing that, we have the clarity from our leader, what's expected of us. We know what our top 3 priorities are for the season that we're in. And if we're not going to meet those metrics, we need to figure out creatively a way to, sort of pass off on these other things that are kind of low-hanging fruit, so that we can really embrace what is being asked of us and provide really great work. And if we recognize that, if we put our energy into the 3 top things that our leaders are looking for, then we're not horrible people for asking for help for some of these other things. And it shows other nurses they don't have to have all the answers either. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes total sense. And again, it goes back to that theme of unspoken expectations. So many of us are living in these leadership roles with these unspoken expectations around workload and time management. And we're not having the conversation out loud, and how much of our struggle could be solved with sitting down with our leader or our peers and saying, here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do. What are your thoughts? How do we solve this together? I think that's so powerful. Absolutely.
And it's so funny, listening to you say that every area of our life, if we just asked for clarity, you would be miles ahead. And so much resentment or expectation hangover would be eliminated.
I like that expectation hangover. That's such a great term. I love that. So my last question, though, is specific to your work, because this is rich and so full of great strategies. What feedback are you getting from your clients, and how do you know that these strategies are effective based on that feedback?
Yeah. So I get so excited when somebody calls me and says, I left 4 days of this week on time and I went and worked out. One of my nurses is like, dang girl, you're out of here. Like you see the clock gets to 5 o'clock and I see you like speeding down the hallway.
Yeah.
Like your horse blinders on and like you're taking off. Like
Yeah.
that's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah.
So feeling that confidence, like the world didn't end because you left on time gives you sort of that exhilarating sensation. Like, okay, well, I'm going to try next week too and see how it goes. And before you know it, you set a new precedent. The second thing I've heard of setting boundaries with that, people understand that your no is valuable, or like when you say yes to something, you really want to do it. You really have the capacity to do it. And so it feels good versus they feel like you're just saying yes just to, blow wind up their skirt or whatever. When you say no, people believe you because they can believe your yes. So when you say no, they understand like you can't take this on. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because you're at capacity and you care enough about the work that you're doing that we have to figure out a different way to get this done. Yeah. And it also, like when you hear like from your charge nurses, like so-and-so wanted me to take a team in this area, but because I was dealing with this family and this critical patient, I couldn't. And I felt confident in saying, I can send you another nurse to help with this situation right now. It's really important that this family member has my support and this nurse has my support. Yeah. And that felt like she had permission to do it because this nurse had sort of set the groundwork for saying yes to what you can and no to what you can't. And then the end of the day ritual is so fun. So people get really creative with this. Like I share with them in my end of the day ritual when I was a nurse on the floor there was on the way, this long hallway on the way out. Once I passed the last fire alarm system button, I was like, free. I'm done. I don't have to carry any of this day with me. And it was a practice. It was kind of like my trigger for, okay, now the next part of my day begins. I'm mom, I'm wife, I'm personal versus the nurse. So when people are able to say, I had dinner with my kids and my phone was in the other room and my kids were like, Mom, where's your phone? And I was like, I don't have it. This is so cool. Like you have all of my attention. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so the kids recognizing that mom was present, mom was there. It was really kind of beautiful for her to be like, oh my gosh, this whole time I'm checking email that's never an emergency. It's just me feeling like I have to keep up on these emails. But my kids were watching and I guess I didn't really realize that. Like them feeling good that one positive came out of them asking for help gives them permission to sort of continue along that way. Like what other blind spots do I have? Where else can I improve? Because it's not all or nothing. Yeah. And hospitals would have us believe that it is. But they like to exploit our servant heart, in my personal opinion. So the goal is to like, what do we have control over? And is it aligning with what we value?
Yeah, I love that. Perfect. Well, these are such great strategies. And I think we hit on all the major pain points for these nurse managers. And so speaking of work-life balance too, I know that work is a big part of our lives, but it's obviously not our whole experience. So Ilene, we all need to be able to experience joy and laughter, even outside of work. So I'd love to ask my guests, where are you going to get laughter in your life right now?
So if I'm being completely honest, it's like at the end of the day when I should be sleeping and I'm looking at Instagram reels and I'm dying over the teenage girl ones with mom, like the menopausal versus the puberty child and like the the disconnect there. And I also like every cheesy dog video, they just crack me up.
Yeah.
And I'm also finding myself like, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I love fantasy romance.
Yeah.
Reading for fun is a great way to sort of decompress after the day. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Those are great examples. I love that. Yeah. TikTok and I get on it maybe twice a week, but when I get on it, I spiral. I find that I'm spending way too, because the algorithm is so smart now. I know Reels is the same way on Instagram. They know what content you're responding to, and what your dwell time, like what you're looking at, and they just feed you more. It's tough. Mm-hmm. It's tough, but it is nice to kind of check out a little bit too. So I totally get that. Mm-hmm. So I know our listeners are going to want to connect with you further. Where can they find you? And I know you're also giving away some lead magnet freebies. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. So you can find me if you go to my LinkedIn profile, you can select a time to meet with me. I offer everyone a free call just to see if you want to know what coaching is about or how I could be of assistance to you. So you can find the link there for Calendly. And then I have a couple of things I've been working on. I recorded a webinar. It's called the Off the Clock webinar. And really it talks about some of those strategies in more detail about how to disconnect from the hospital and reinvigorate your life outside of the hospital. The second thing is I created a sort of end of the day ritual, or to add to your end of the day ritual. And it's called like From Dreading Your Shift to Calm Confidence in 15 Minutes. And what that is a journal prompt. And then it helps you sort of reevaluate the day that you just had and then set yourself up for success the next day by creating sort of like the airway breathing circulation approach to the tasks that you need to complete tomorrow. So as a leader for the next day, what is A, for act now, aka urgent, high impact that needs to be addressed? B, how can I build momentum on important things, but not the top of the line? And then C, what can I calendar? What can wait, but what still matters, right? Like, so it just kind of gives you prompts to help you decide and feel when you leave for the day that you're walking into a little bit less chaos, even though I know you're putting out fires all day long. But if you have sort of like a bare bones approach to what you want to target,
Right.
It seems to be a little less crazy for people.
Yeah, love that. Those are great examples. Ilene, this has been such a joy to chat with you about a group of leaders that are near and dear to my heart. I know there are some nurse managers out there who needed to hear from you today. So thank you for the gift of that. And for our listeners, and for our listeners, each of Ilene's strategies and tips can be found in the show notes. I'll also include links to her LinkedIn profile as well and to those lead magnet freebies. Until next time, Chaos Whispers, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thanks for joining us on the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare. If today's episode resonated with you, please be sure to follow this podcast, rate, and leave a review on your favorite platform. I'm Dr. Megan Carter, and I will be back next week with more real talk, fresh strategies, and guests who are redefining what it means to lead with impact. Want to keep the conversation going? Be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and download free tools and resources from my website. Both links are in the show notes. Let's heal this broken healthcare system together, one day at a time.